If you still think Sundays in the Middle Ages were all about chillin', praying, and feastin', then they've told it all wrong. While nobles were enjoying big meals and priests were busy preaching, the average peasant wasn't having a chilled out day by any means. For them, it was more like a punishment. By the end of this video, you'll understand why medieval peasants didn't just dislike Sundays, they dreaded them. So, let's start with the big one. You couldn't skip church. Sunday was church day, and you had to be there. In fact, it was a legal requirement enforced by both the church and your local lord. Medieval law and religion basically went hand in hand, so Sunday Mass wasn't optional. Even if you were exhausted from 6 days of brutal labor, you still had to show up in your stiffest clothes and pretend to pay attention for hours on an empty stomach. If you missed a service, you could face a fine, or worse, publicly scolded and labeled a sinner. Everyone in the village knew everyone, and eyes were everywhere. Church wasn't a peaceful escape. It was a chore, and tired peasants hardly looked forward to sitting there for hours. Oh, and if you thought being forced to sit through a sermon was the worst part, wait until you hear what it costs to be holy. No one was demanding money for you to visit the church, right? Wrong. Not in the Middle Ages. Every peasant family had to hand over 10% of everything they earned. Not just coins, but crops, livestock, eggs, and even wool. This was called the tithe, and it wasn't a situation of donate if you will. It was mandatory. Bear in mind, these people were already struggling to survive. That piglet you were raising for winter stew could be going to the church, or the wheat you grew for your children, a tenth of it would be the church's property. Oh, and if you refuse or try to beg for mercy, well, there's a punishment for that. Likely in the form of losing all your land. And the worst part? The village priest got richer, and your family stayed poor. And on Sunday, you still had to smile through Mass and act like you were grateful. Pretty raw deal, right? Well, things got even more uncomfortable because church wasn't just about worship, it was about watching you. Church in medieval times wasn't just a spiritual space, it was basically the village gossip center with holy walls. If you did anything wrong during the week, such as gossiping, missing Mass, arguing with your neighbor, or didn't tithe, you could publicly be shamed for it in front of everyone. And the church had creative ways of doing it. The priest would call out sinners by name in front of everyone during the Sunday Mass. Then there was this thing called the penitent's bench, where you would sit apart from everyone in full view, marked as a sinner. And if you thought that was the worst it could get, oh no, they had another tool, an uncomfortable iron mask called the scold's bridle, and mostly the women who got accused of speaking too much were given this form of punishment. Yeah, you could say the Middle Ages were a little bit sexist. As you wore this humiliating mask or sat on the chair of sin, people watched, judged, and laughed. Yeah, your life was put on full display on a Sunday. If you were poor, tired, or just plain human, you were probably doing something wrong. If you thought you were all good after being dragged to the church, paying your tithes, and risking public shame, well, not quite. Those who sinned were expected to confess their wrongdoings in front of the local priest, and if they refused the opportunity, well, bad news, you weren't just considered shy or an introvert, it could make you a suspect of heresy or even witchcraft. Yeah, to these people, not confessing meant you had something to hide, something dark, or worse, consorted with the devil. And if you were a woman, this was even more terrifying. Skipping a confession could spiral into accusations of casting spells or poisoning crops, and in these times, that was not good news for you. And if you thought your confessions were private, not always. In small villages, priests sometimes pressured people publicly by saying, "Have you repented for speaking ill of your husband?" Try to imagine being grilled in front of your neighbors for simply disobeying. And once you finished spilling your sins, guess what came next? The priest's hand didn't just offer blessings, it reached for your coin purse, just like it does today. Just a little bit ago we talked about tithes, but every Sunday also came with voluntary donations, which, surprise, weren't exactly voluntary. Priests passed around collection baskets every single week, and if you didn't put something in, people would watch and notice. Even the priest noticed. Refused long enough, and you'd be labeled stingy, or worse, unfaithful. Some clergy even publicly called out those who gave too little. Peasants nicknamed the whole practice holy robbery because by the time you left the church, you had less food, less privacy, and less dignity. These collections funded everything from candle wax to the priest's personal comforts, while most peasants couldn't even afford shoes. And if you thought saying no to God's representative was an option, think again. Crazy stuff, right? But if you're finding this as eye-opening as it is unfair, why not support the channel? Press the like button if you like this video, and please subscribe for more. Thanks a lot. No matter how good the weather was or how cool the summer breeze was on a Sunday, you weren't supposed to have fun. Literally. Singing, dancing, playing games, or even just laughing too loudly could get you fined, publicly scolded, or whipped. In the eyes of the church, Sunday was a sacred day for rest and reflection, but only in ways they approved of. Anything joyful or playful was seen as distracting from God. In 14th century England, a man named John Ricker was flogged for playing ball with his children on a Sunday afternoon. Even simply watching others having fun could get you in trouble for encouraging sin. Markets were shut, sports were banned, and musicians were often threatened with being officially excluded from the religious community. Yeah, this wasn't just control, it was control of your joy. And yet, while fun was illegal on Sundays, many peasants had no choice but to keep doing something far riskier. Here's the harsh truth. While lords rested and priests judged, peasants still had mouths to feed, and that meant sneaking in work before dawn or after sunset, even on the holy day. Technically, any labor on Sunday was banned, but what do you do when your cow is sick, your field needs weeding, or your family hasn't eaten? You risk it. Historical records from 13th century France mention villagers who were caught milking cows or digging potatoes at dawn, and punished with fines or public penance. Thing is though, survival doesn't follow a calendar. If your harvest failed, your family starved. So peasants learned to work secretly, churning butter early, collecting firewood late, and hiding their tools when the priest came around. Some might call them rule breakers, but really, they were just trying to survive against frankly ridiculous opposition. By now it should be pretty clear to you, Sunday wasn't just about worship, it was about obedience. The medieval church didn't just guide people spiritually, it ruled their lives. Priests worked hand in hand with landowners, lords, and kings to keep peasants in line. Sermons weren't just about salvation, they reinforced who was in charge. Disobey, and it wasn't just a sin, it was a crime. This wasn't religion as comfort, this was religion as social control. Even basic choices, what you wore, what you said, where you went, were judged. The church alone decided who was moral, and the law backed them up. The lords and clergy basically used Sunday sermons to brainwash peasants into accepting their miserable place in society. But the control wasn't just physical, it was very much psychological, because even when no one was watching, peasants lived in fear, not just of punishment, but of hell itself. Medieval life was inundated with superstition, and Sunday was when it all came to a boil. Miss a mass? Your crops might fail. Gossip during a sermon? Your baby could fall ill. People believed that disobeying church rules, even just thinking the wrong thing, could bring curses or invite demons. It wasn't just fear of punishment, it was the fear of damnation. And the church leaned into that fear hard. Tales of witches lurking, devils watching, and sinners burning were regularly preached, especially to the peasants. Some believed storms were God's wrath for breaking the Sabbath. Others were so terrified of spirits stealing their souls that they wore charms even to Mass. Yeah, this wasn't exactly faith, more like weaponized paranoia. And for the people who simply wanted a break, Sunday became the most anxious, guilt-ridden day of the week. And if you thought we were done, well, I have one more thing for you. Now, imagine being dragged to church every single week, and not understanding a single word that was said. This was the reality for most medieval peasants. That's right, folks, the entire Mass was in Latin, a language spoken by priests, scholars, and pretty much no one else in the whole village. That's right, people sat through hours of chanting, praying, and preaching with no clue what they were actually saying. Got a question? You didn't have the privilege to ask it. You couldn't interact, you couldn't ask questions, you were just expected to follow along, kneel when told, and nod like you understood what's going on. This was not about learning or feeling connected, it was about obedience. And to make things worse, once the confusing ceremony ended, your Sunday still wasn't over. Oh yeah, that's right, I actually have one last thing for you. Because now came the part everyone hated even more: church labor. That's right, your one supposed day of rest often came with a to-do list from the church. Peasants were expected to do free labor for the church every Sunday. That could mean sweeping the floors, trimming the graveyard, fetching water, fixing fences, or cleaning candle wax off the altar. No pay, no thanks, no choice. And if you skipped it, you'd be labeled lazy, sinful, or ungrateful, and you could easily be reported to the local lord or priests, who weren't exactly forgiving of your transgression. Tired, sick, or having your own chores waiting at home? It didn't matter. When the church called, you showed up, because saying no wasn't just disrespectful, it was dangerous to your life. So yeah, sorry to say, all those stories you heard about medieval Sundays being peaceful or holy were not true. They were just days of confusion, judgment, and unpaid work. And that is why, for most peasants, Sundays weren't the best day of the week, they were the worst. Does hearing this make you enjoy your Sunday a little bit more from now on? Let us know in the comments below, and go check out the crazy superstitions people feared in the Middle Ages by clicking here, and I'll see you there. Thanks for watching.